Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are at the start of the 2054 preseason. Spring training is going to start about a month from now. Hasn't been an incredibly busy off-season for the Rockies, but we have just 2 holes left that we are looking to fill. Want to add a catcher to the Major League roster, and we want to add a utility infielder. We have an offer out. As you can see, we have offers out to many minor league free agents at this point. The most notable offer is to second baseman Juan Castillo, who has previously been a Rocky, and we are trying to bring back as a utility infielder for us for this upcoming season. We may re-engage at some point with catcher Max Haynow to be our backup catcher. And we're also considering making a trade for a more established catcher who could maybe become a starter for us as we try to close out this Colorado Rockies series with a three-peat here in the 2054 season. And good news, we do have Juan Castillo on board, so we've announced the agreement with him. He is rejoining the Rockies as a utility infielder for us, so we will get him onto the active roster. Obviously have about a month now still since the preseason began yesterday to finish up some final preparations, hopefully get a bunch of those minor league players that we showed you that we've made offers to signed, because we will have to kind of beef up some of our teams. We haven't kind of promoted or demoted anybody since last September at this point. So we're bringing on some players who can likely play in the higher levels of the minors, and then clearly we're going to be moving up people from some of our rookie ball teams onto A ball and up into high A ball and cutting some people. So we've got a lot of work to do on the minor league system that we'll mostly be doing on offline, not making you watch the boring nature of some of that work. But hopefully we'll bring on, as I said, a lot of those minor league free agents we've made offers to. And then over the coming weeks, we're going to continue to monitor the catcher market and see what we need to do to ensure that we've got another major league quality catcher on our team for the upcoming season. And our old friend Max Haynow has reached out to see if we are willing to revisit contract talks with him. Let's see if he's going to be coming in at $2.8 million. It ain't going to happen. Well, he's looking for a 1-year contract at $2.4 million. All right. Or no, that was what our last offer was that he wasn't happy about. He says he's happy now. We'll give him slightly more than that. Looks like he's off of the starting role that had been a hang-up in our last episode. I don't think $2.55 million is going to get it done. He is actually willing to listen to that, so we may have waited out Max Haynow long enough. As I mentioned in the last episode, the thing I like about him, if we do end up upgrading at the position, the nice thing about Max is that he does have options left. So we could certainly put him in AAA. Now, we are not telling him that right now, but with two option years left, if we do end up adding a new player to start over Alex Alvarez at catcher, Haynow will likely be the odd man out and end up in AAA. So spending a lot of money for a guy who could conceivably end up in AAA for us, but we've got money to spend, and he does have pretty solid defense, so he would be at best our backup catcher, and at worst he is a really nice option to have in case either of our 2 major league catchers gets injured. And we do have Haynow on board, so we do have a backup catcher finally. As I said, we still may be more ambitious with Juan Diaz in the final weeks before spring training if we can put a deal together. But there's certainly less urgency to think about that now, given that we now finally do have two major league quality catchers who are both pretty good defensively on the roster. And I think at this point, now that we do have Haynow signed, we're going to hold off on Julio Diaz. He would be an upgrade at catcher for us, like the defense, like the durability, and he's a better offensive player than either Alvarez or Haynow. But you look at what we have to get up for him potentially. Adrian Ortega, a number 33 prospect in baseball. Angel Castro, who's probably going to be in Double A and Triple A this year. Looks like a solid major league bat, maybe a fourth outfielder, but a good fourth outfielder. Catcher Gilberto Alba, who was our second round pick a couple of years ago. And first baseman Roger Gonzalez, an international free agent signing, who still looks like he could have a pretty good bat. And even with those four prospects, we still have to basically give up another big-time prospect or one of our big-time major league players. So I just don't think it makes sense for a modest upgrade at catcher. Would it make us better? Yes. Are we in win-now mode? Yes. Is this likely the final year that we'll be playing as the Rockies? Yes. So why don't you make this trade, Old School Sports? Because I think it's a little unrealistic that we would give up all of that for a small upgrade at catcher. It just doesn't seem responsible for me to leave this mythical team to whoever the mythical GM who will likely be taking over for me next season is, by having just totally decimated the farm system for a small upgrade at catcher. We've already slipped back to 10th in terms of our minor league system with some of the trades that we've made over the last year to bring on major league quality players. But I just don't think that trade makes sense. So I think we're going to be going into the spring training in a few weeks with just those two catchers. Actually, spring training later this week. It's already February 16th with just those two catchers. So I am going to take a look here at free agency and maybe just try to make an offer to one of these other catchers who's not looking for a major league contract. Hopefully it won't get into a situation where we have to be playing one of these guys at the major league level, but would not be the worst thing in the world to have a little bit of an insurance policy with someone who would not be a total embarrassment if we do have some injuries going forward. And as spring training opens, we've got 45 players in camp, only 18 pitchers. We're going to go with our six-man rotation. You can see Tawase Adebamge, at least for spring training, is our number 2 starter. I think he's still likely the guy that would most likely be moved to the pen from those 6 players. But we'll take a look and see what he can do in the starting rotation this year. Right now, we're going to give Chase Crawford the first opportunity to try to become our closer. We'll see what he can do during the spring training period. Certainly with the likes of Tyrone Colbert, Elijah Smith, and Julio Sanchez, we have plenty of options who could potentially take over as closer if Crawford doesn't work out. But it looks like he is healthy this year, unlike last season, and hopefully he can really embrace that role and take it over and dominate for us. He is definitely one of the hardest throwers on our team. And we've got a lot more everyday players in camp, 27 at this point, particularly deep in the outfield. You can see we've got a ton of young outfielders up, most of whom have little to no chance of actually making the team, but we're going to try to take a good look at as many of our good young players as possible during spring training. And we're about a week and a half into spring training, just had our first significant injury. Tyrone Colbert who we picked up in that trade with the Mets right after the end of the season. Going to be out for 6 weeks with shoulder inflammation. So certainly not optimal, but it's only February 28th right now, so he should be back sometime in middle to late April. So not going to miss too much of the season, but he will start it on the injured list. And as we move in towards the later stages of spring training, more significant injury now. Tawase Adebamge, who was competing for a spot in the rotation, even though we thought he was an underdog, has been one of the better performers. But he just suffered a bicep strain, going to be out 5 to 6 weeks. So that will certainly move him to the injured list and make it pretty clear that our 5-man rotation of Alvarado, Vasquez, Duran, Toledo, and Ortega in some order will be the same 5 players that finished up in our rotation at the end of last season. Well, we've made it to the end of spring training, 11-13 record for the Rockies. Not that that's incredibly important. Kind of interesting to take a look at the spring batting leaders, though, because Julio Diaz, the catcher from Tampa Bay that we had been thinking about going after, all he did was hit .413 in the spring. So he also had tied for the league lead with 18 runs batted in. So he is certainly going to be an interesting option for us to consider as things go forward, but I haven't made a trade for him now. Don't see any real need to. I think we are a pretty loaded team. Fortunately for us, no other significant injuries, just a matter of getting the now 43-man roster down to 26. Adebamge about 4 weeks away, Tyrone Colbert 2 to 3 weeks away. So we are missing 2 key members of our pitching staff, both of whom were likely to be in the bullpen, and one of whom possibly in the closer role. So that will give us an opportunity to obviously go with a different closer than Adebamge, who was our closer last year, or Tyrone Colbert, who we picked up this offseason thinking he might potentially become a closer for us. So we'll get to try some different things in the pitching staff over the first few weeks of the season, and the departure of those 2 for at least a few weeks also means that someone who we hadn't really anticipated being on the pitching staff will likely head north to Colorado with us for at least a couple of weeks and get an opportunity that wouldn't have expected otherwise. And it's been pretty easy to get the pitching staff down to 14 pitchers. We are going to cut it down to 12. So we've got 2 more cuts to make. The players who are most exposed, Victor Alvarez, 22, soon to be 23-year-old reliever. He is our Rule 5 pick from this past year from Toronto, or one of them. Never played above high A ball, and his control still appears like it's going to be a problem. His stuff and movement are interesting. Do worry that he's going to walk a ton of batters at the major league level. So he's a little scary, but obviously someone that we would need to hang on to maintain their rights. Another young reliever, David Berrios, pitched in AAA for us last year. Actually, he's not that young. He's 27 years old. Minor league free agent signing from a couple of years ago. Pretty much a replacement level type player, maybe not even a replacement level player. So we are going to send Berrios down. He is definitely going to be cut. The last guy on the bubble is Andy Mendoza, and he's a real prospect for us. 22-year-old that we picked in the 2nd round out of Notre Dame a couple of years ago. He spent last year in Double-A ball, where he was pretty good, 2.54 ERA over 109 and 2/3 innings. Big jump for him to go to the majors from Double-A, but certainly has a profile with good movement on his pitches, ground baller pitcher with ground ball tendencies that I don't think it's impossible for him to make this jump. And I think he's just a better pitcher right now than Victor Alvarez. So we are actually going to go ahead and send Alvarez back from whence he came to the Blue Jays. and that'll take us down to a 12-man staff. Definitely not my typical MO to have a player going from AA right to the majors at 22 years old. But with the injuries, I think it makes sense to at least start Mendoza here for the next couple of weeks. Once we have both Adebamge and Colbert healthy, my assumption is that Mendoza will almost certainly go down to AAA for a little more seasoning. And once those two players are healthy, a former starter of ours and definite veteran on this team, Juan Vargas, could have his major league spot in jeopardy once everyone is healthy. The 39-year-old, his stuff has really kind of fallen off the map this past offseason. He's got an average major league sinker at this point. His slider and his splitter are both below average. He still is an extreme ground baller in terms of his tendencies and a ground ball pitcher with good movement. And he's coming off a year in which he did put up a 2.84 ERA for us. So not ready to cast him to the curb immediately, even though his ratings look like he could be a bit problematic for us. But certainly if there are no injuries to the pitching staff and Adebamge and Colbert are both ready over the next month or so, it's not inconceivable that Juan Vargas, if he's not pitching well, could lose his spot on the team. But I would assume that Vargas, Andy Mendoza, and then Javon Williams, who was excellent last year between AAA and the majors for us with a 105 ERA and a 0.71 ERA at the 105 in AAA, 0.71 at the major league level, if I could use my words. Doesn't necessarily have the tendencies we really want for a pitcher, average movement on his pitches, no ground ball tendencies, but he was very effective at the major league level last year. But I would assume that Williams, Vargas, and Mendoza are the three pitchers whose spots on the roster are most in jeopardy once we are fully healthy. Certainly looking at this pitching staff, feel that we're in pretty good shape. As we mentioned, the five starters, the same as previous year: Alvarado, Vasquez, Duran, Ortega, and Toledo. Chase Crawford's going to close for us to start. Elijah Smith, the rookie, former third overall pick, number 30 prospect in baseball, who is yet to give up a earned run or any runs during the regular season, although they did finally get to him in the playoffs, will be up with us for the full year. Certainly a guy who could potentially move into the rotation if any of the veterans are underperforming. Will Lucio, a right-hander, who could definitely move into the rotation. Javon Williams, who we talked about. Julio Sanchez, the Cuban import, who we think could be a pretty effective reliever for us, could be a potential closer to consider down the line. And then Vargas and Mendoza, the two guys whose roster spots, along with Williams, could eventually be in jeopardy, will be pitching in long relief for us. So I like the potential of this pitching staff. Do I think it's going to be as dominant as it was last year? I'd be surprised if that occurs. You can see there's also an argument right now with guys like Mendoza and Williams on the team who don't have as much stamina to maybe go to a 13-man pitching staff. Not something that we're going to do immediately, but do notice that we don't have the same kind of excellent stamina all over the board that we have had in the past. So it's not the worst thing in the world that we've got some money saved to bring on some salary as the season goes along, because we are definitely in win now mode. But I think the two injuries to a couple of guys who definitely would have been on the major league team shows that we don't necessarily maybe have the depth in AAA that we have had in previous years. Definitely have a few question marks in terms of Mendoza, Vargas, and Williams on the major league staff at this point. So depending on what the injury situation looks like and depending on how people perform, we could be looking for some pitching help as we get closer to the trade deadline, given that we are absolutely a win now type of team. And as I mentioned earlier, we had a ton of everyday players in camp, still 27 there, so we're going to be cutting around half of them to get down to 14. Some of the cuts will obviously be easy, particularly with a lot of these young outfielders, but once it starts getting to the point where it's interesting, I'll jump back in and let you know what I'm thinking. All right, we got the roster down to 17 players before we started getting into a few challenges, or at least more interesting decisions. We mentioned in the offseason we brought on Juan Castillo to be a utility infielder for us. He is certainly going to fill that role, and that's bad news for Tony Encarnacion, 23-year-old who was a third-round draft pick back in 2048. Similar player to Castillo, not quite as good. He's going to make his debut in AAA for us, but won't be making the Major League roster. Similarly, Edgar Estrada, who may actually be a little bit of a better bat than Castillo, was our Rule 5 pick from a year ago, spent the whole year at the Major League level where he hit just .234. He, although is versatile defensively, is not incredibly proficient defensively, so we're going to have him spend some time down in AAA as well, maybe work on at least improving his ability to play some of those positions with some more consistent playing time. So that brings us down to 15 players and just one cut to go. And the last cut is going to be one of three different outfielders who aren't in the starting lineup. Angel Gomez was a minor league free agent signing of ours in 2051. He's developed into a pretty solid major league player. Got his first extended action last year and hit .319 in 276 at-bats. Certainly with a bat like that, going to be tough to move him off the team. Hector Rivera, who was a minor league free agent signing a little over a year ago. Excellent defensive player, great speed. Only hit .273 at the major league level. Not that .273 is a bad batting average, but it's certainly not what Gomez had done at the major league level. But he's a 26-year-old, doesn't really have anything left to prove in AAA at this point. And then the last guy in the mix is Rogelio Romero, who was one of our Rule 5 draft picks last year. Really like his bat and his potential. Got a good personality in the clubhouse. But I think we are going to move on from Romero and make this the first year of this playthrough that we didn't actually keep a Rule 5 pick on the roster. The main reason is his defense. I think he's an interesting potential bat, although he's got some work to do. Like the personality, like the durability, but you look at his defense and it's definitely far inferior to what we'd be getting in the outfield from Hector Rivera. And also Angel Gomez is better defensively with that really good range and error rating, even though he's got a bit of a rag arm in the outfield. But especially given that Gomez and Rivera have both proven their ability to hit somewhat at the major league level, we are going to send Romero back to the Mariners. No Rule 5 players make the team this year, as I mentioned, for the first time in this playthrough. But we have figured out the 26-man roster that we're going to head north with. And with the 14 position players settled, we'll say this, although we had some surprises on the pitching staff because of the injuries, the 14 players that we are bringing to Colorado with us are exactly the 14 that I thought they would be when we began camp, and quite honestly, ever since we signed Haynow and Castillo. Alex Alvarez going to be our starting catcher for, what is this, his third year or his fourth year in a row as our catcher? Time flies, yeah, it'll be his third full year. We picked him up in that trade with Detroit back in 2051. He was a backup then, but this will be his third year as our full-time starter. He'll be backed up by Haynow after we finally got him signed. Adam Fields back as our DH. Elijah Moore back as our first baseman. Juan Castillo, who we talked about, is a utility infielder for us. Danny Ruiz, depending on the handedness that we are facing, is going to be our starter at third against righties, second against lefties. Alex Ortega moves into more of a platoon role. The young third, not really a young third baseman anymore. He's a veteran now. He's 30 years old. He was a youngster when we started this playthrough as a rookie, but he's now well into his arbitration years. He is going to be playing third just against left-handed pitching at this point. Jordan Castares is going to be our shortstop against right-handed pitching. Israel Mays is actually going to play second base for us against righties and then be our starting shortstop against lefties. So we've got a lot of mixing and matching going on with the infielders, but think that versatility should help us out. The outfield's a lot simpler. Carrillo once again in left, Farley once again in center, Bobby Perez once again in right, with Rivera and Gamez as the backups. So we have the 26-man roster figured out, and we have an obvious goal for this team, to win a third consecutive World Series. And we will find out how the prognosticators think we're going to do this year, and also get the brand new season started in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.